Thank you for joining me today on my sewing journey. Today I've been working on a basket quilt block. Now this is a lot simpler than it looks, and I know it can look a little confusing. First thing I did was made myself a chart so I knew where the half squared triangles were going and which position they were going in, which sometimes can be a little tricky. And after that, I put my measurements on there. So the first thing I started with was cutting up this triangle here for the basket part. I'll lift up the ruffle so you can see it goes all the way up. That was the first thing I did. And that measured 5 1/4 by 7 1/2. So the longest part was the 7 1/2. Now, what I did after that was I decorated it. I took a piece of white fabric, hemmed it on both sides, and then used the longest stitch that I have on my machine to run it just right straight across like this, and then I pulled it to gather it. Next, I sewed it onto the basket, and then I took out some pretty lace, sewed that on, and then sewed the ribbon on. Then what I did was I gave myself like a seam allowance of a 1/2 inch for this. I should have mentioned that first, that you're going to give yourself that seam allowance. So everything's going to start a 1/2 inch down from the top of your basket. Then I flipped it over and sewed it onto my background fabric. And I made sure that I pinned my ruffle down like this on the inside so it wouldn't catch all the little fullness of it. It is going to catch the sides, so you don't have to worry about hemming the sides, but you don't want to lose your ruffle in there. After that, I flipped it to the side and I pressed it lightly with the iron. Now here's where you can make a decision because you didn't put the handle on yet. You can decide, like, maybe you want to put a kitty in your basket, or maybe you want to put Christmas bulbs or jack-o'-lanterns or flowers, seasonal flowers, or something to that effect, making it a different style quilt. Then I put the handle on. The handle was 1.5 inches, and I hemmed it on both sides. Now you could put a bow on the top of there if you wanted to. I didn't want to, but you could do that. You could also put little ribbon roses on the background here, would be pretty too. Next came the side borders. Now, the first thing I did was I cut 2 1/2 square, 3 of those for this part right here. And then the basket color fabric, I cut 2 of those in a 2 1/2 square. And then I made my half square triangles. And there are many, many different ways you can make half square triangles. I was taught to cut the fabric the same width and length, and then lay it on top and find the center, draw a line, and then just sew it straight down. And that's how I was taught to do it. So you can do them any way you were taught to do them. They're not that difficult to do. Just make sure that you're pressing it good, and you give yourself a seam allowance for when you cut off the excess. If you're cutting off the excess, you don't have to. I mean, you can just fold it over and sew it like that. But if you're cutting off the excess, make sure you give yourself a seam allowance so you don't accidentally cut too close and have it rip on you. Then I sewed on I took one of my half square triangles and I sewed it to the 2 1/2 square, and then I sewed a 5 1/4 that's 2 1/2 wide, 5 1/4 to the end of the block. On this side, pretty much the same thing. Then the outer ones on this one, I ran out of my background fabric, so I had to cut another little piece. This is 2 1/2 wide by 9 1/2. So the block ends up being 9 1/2 square. And you can do many things with this block. You can make a quilt, or you can make a wall hanging picture, or you can make a pillow, or even do 4 of them and make 4 for a pillow instead of 1. You can make them all different sizes. And it can make it 12 by 12, 12 by 12 square. That would make a really nice pillow, and just have one. I hope you like this idea. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for liking. Thank you for subscribing, and happy sewing.